Good afternoon, Vinyl community. Cheers, everyone. It's an anniversary of sorts. It always seems to be an anniversary nowadays. You can't go on Twitter or Facebook or Instagram or pick your social platform without someone celebrating an anniversary of something, a song, an album, a band, etc., etc. But I've been looking forward to making this video for a while since I learned of the reissue coming out, as this album holds a very special place in my life, which we'll get to. But what I want to talk about is kind of my experience with this album, why it's so meaningful to me. We'll get to the reissue and my thoughts on it, and then maybe we'll wrap it up, because it's a very polarizing album. We're going to talk about this one right here if you haven't read the description, and why haven't you? You don't blindly click on videos. Yes, 90125. It's celebrating its 35th anniversary, released in November 1983. This is all unrehearsed, so I'm sure if I'm wrong at any point, you'll let me know about it. November 1983, and I definitely remember when this album came out. If, like I said, it's the 35th anniversary, I feel very old. But if you're of my age and you live in North America, this was perhaps the first album you heard by Yes, and that was your introduction, which is why this album is so special to me. And like a lot of people my age, especially if you live in North America, you probably worked your way backwards to explore their other catalog, which was vastly different from this album. This album is a definite polarizing talking point in the Yes fan community, or with Yes fans in general. So like me, you probably worked your way backwards, and then hopefully you follow them throughout their career. What is so special about this album with me, it's like I said, it's the first album that introduced me to Yes. It was a very impactful album on my life. As as commercial as progressive rock fans might think it was still a little bit left of center for a very young 12, 13-year-old. Who had never heard vocals like that, or that iconic riff that opens the album. But that album has been a mainstay in my life. And in fact, there was a concert video that came out from this tour, this one right here, 9012 Live. We're all familiar with this live video. It aired infinitely on satellite and MTV and etc., etc. Then it came out on, I believe, VHS and DVD. But I was at this very concert. It made a very big impact in my life, like the album did. I was seeing the band at this time. You have to understand. We have to understand that I had no prior knowledge of Yes before this. So let's take that out of the equation right now when talking about this album. I was at this very concert. This was filmed in my city of Edmonton, Alberta, Canada, over 2 nights. I went by myself. None of my friends were into Yes. And it may have been my first concert. I can't remember now. It may have been. But if you paid for a ticket for the first night, if you made a donation to the food bank, you got into the second night for free. So they filmed over 2 nights. So yeah, so that for that very point, or for that aspect of it, it adds to how meaningful this album is to me. So just to point that out, really quickly. I have this album in many formats. Like a lot of Yes albums, I have multiple versions. What you're looking at here, and I'm going to show you this just for comparison's sake, for what we're going to talk about coming up with the reissue I'm going to show you. This is an absolute pristine original pressing of the album from the time. And this is the 2004 Rhino reissue with the bonus tracks. Very, very good copy of that CD. For all the versions I have, this might be overall the best version for CD. Is this, I think it's 2009 Audio Fidelity 24 karat gold CD remastered by Steve Hoffman, the one and only Steve Hoffman. You may or may not like him, or you may not know who he is. You can always Google that. This one remains maybe the benchmark for audio fidelity or sound quality for this album, is this one right here. 5 minutes in and we're finally going to get to this album. This is the reissue. This is the 35th anniversary reissue of 90125. It is a straight reissue. There's nothing fancy to it. In fact, you would be hard-pressed to tell this from the original if it wasn't for the colored vinyl, which I'll show you. It's colored vinyl. It's tri-colored vinyl, in fact. And it has a little hype sticker here announcing the 35th anniversary. For those of you who don't know, 90125, it was named, that was the original catalog number for it in the US. And you can always look on Wikipedia for the history of this album. I don't want to go too much into that. I'm going to take it as said that you know the history of this being the first album with Trevor Rabin. Tony Kaye came back on board. There's a long, sordid history with it, with this album. And we'll talk about that after this. I'm going to show you the album, and we'll talk about this after, so you can kind of, if you just came to look at the vinyl, then you can see it, and you can dispense with my blabbering. But anyways, like I said, this is exactly the same. The colors are a little bit more vibrant on this one. It's probably just a straight scan. The good thing about this reissue, this is part of a Rhino reissue series, which I think is called Back to the 80s. I could be wrong on that one. There's a few of them in this series. But it's they're very affordable albums. But as you'll find out, that doesn't mean it's skimping, if that's a word, on quality. But like I said, you get nothing fancy, you get no booklets, you get nothing that's not in the original vinyl, except for, this is the colored vinyl. Tri-colored vinyl, representing the colors of the album cover. Exact replica of the Atco label. Very, very impressive colored vinyl, if you ask me. Yes, it's gimmicky, but having said that, that's not the reason why I bought this, which I'll get to in a second. We're going to talk about, if I can get this back in the sleeve properly. Album care first. All right. This is not 180 grams. Like I said, I referred to its affordability of that Rhino series. This was $19.99 in Canada. It's in and around that range. I looked around. Very, very affordable pressing. It's not 180. I'm gonna bet it's maybe 140 grams. I'm gonna guess on that one, but it's in between that vinyl we're used to from the 80s and 180. So it's probably about 140. If you're so inclined to care about such things. My issue with the original pressing, I've had probably 6 or 7 copies of this album come in and out of my hands over the years, as it sold millions of copies in North America. In fact, I think it sold 3 million copies in the US alone. This is the most pristine copy I've ever owned. The gentleman I bought this off of, he told me he had played it once and he shelved it because he wasn't a fan of it. And it looks like it too. It's absolutely pristine. And I was excited about that fact because one of my main complaints about the original vinyl is twofold. Is that it's very difficult finding a pressing, an original pressing, where the intro to Owner of a Lonely Heart isn't overlapped with crackles or pops. Even on a pristine copy, there's still some surface noise that kind of interrupts. And yes, I know pops and crackles and whatnot, that's inherent in vinyl. But it's nice to hear that opening riff clean, if you know what I mean. And then once the music kicks in, any surface noise is negligible. But that was one of my main issues. And another issue of mine, too, with a lot of albums that were pressed in the 80s that sold millions of copies, is that they, sometimes I've read archival interviews and recent interviews with people who pressed records back in the day in the UK and et cetera, and you know they were sometimes for albums like this or Brothers in Arms by Dire Straits, they were employing 3 or 4 record plants, pressing the same album at the same time, just chugging out 1 million albums a day of the same album. And I don't know if due care was taken in a lot of these presses, to be honest with you. They were just worried about filling the racks with records. So I'm not a firm believer that a lot of these bigger selling albums in the 80s are the best presses. And I know there was a 180 gram reissue released on Friday Music not that long ago, and that's a copy I don't have. Some people tell me it's fine. It's very expensive, so I didn't shell out on that one. But that's a total aside. Let's get to this album here. For the price, you're getting bare bones packaging, but the vinyl I was incredibly impressed with. I'm gonna guess it's not taken from the master tapes. It's probably like most albums these days. They're probably taken from high quality digital transfers from the master tapes. But obviously they had to cut the vinyl. They had to do a new cut of it, and I think that is where the differences is that I noticed. I bought this and played this very skeptically. I had my skeptic ears on, and I was wholeheartedly impressed with this one. It quiet intro to Owner of Lonely Hearts. In fact, it's a very, very quiet pressing overall. Might have been a couple ticks in either side one or side two, to be honest with you. Like I said, negligible. Very, very quiet pressing for 140 grams, which I said I'm guessing on that. Incredibly quiet. The main difference, and you know, like a complete nerd, I played this one, then I played this one, then in my car this morning I played this one, and the biggest difference I can hear in this one, the 35th anniversary, tricolor, over a really pristine original pressing is the clarity is a bit better. Chris Squire's bass is it's more to the forefront. The vocals are a lot crisper. Some of the elements of the original vinyl. These are little things, but I did notice them. The keyboards and the drums weren't so predominant as, you know, that 80s sound. Super loud drums, loud keyboards. Everything was a bit more level and a little bit level in that sense. Nothing really jumped out except for Chris Squire's bass. I thought was a bit more punchier, to be honest with you. And the drums kind of sat nicely in the back instead of being right in your face like some pressings I have. So all told, I wouldn't be making this video if I didn't have time for it or I wasn't impressed by it. Talking about the album itself, so you know what? I don't give ratings. This one's a solid 9 out of 10. I'm very pleased for the price. I mean, jump on this. If you ever, you know, like most albums on Amazon, they order a bajillion and they go on to clearance. So you may even get this cheaper. But if you're looking for a good pressing without shelling out a lot of money, it's not just the gimmicky vinyl. I wouldn't buy it just for that, but that was just a nice add-on to it. It's a very, very good pressing of this album. And let's really quickly, I don't want this to drag on too long. It's a very polarizing album. You still have your purist Yes fans who think this is not Yes, but in my humble opinion, it's a much more valid version of Yes than what travels around now with Steve Howe and Alan White playing a couple songs and dragging Tony Kaye back on stage nowadays. I think, you know, that whole argument is kind of wiped out by the very existence of the current version of Yes. That version of Anderson, Rabin, and Wakeman, I think, is pretty stellar. Personally, I would see that in a heartbeat. So I think that argument is kind of out the window. And if you're one of those people who are inclined to to this day argue that this is not a Yes album, let's just take that as said. I understand your point. I've been hearing it for years and years and years. As far as the album itself, really, there's only a couple songs that I could probably live without, to be honest with you. Never been a big fan of Hearts and Our Song. It's not the longest of albums. It had 4 singles off of it, but there's one instrumental in there, which actually won a Grammy. Cinema won Best Instrumental Recording that year. But apart from Hearts and I think Hearts it's 7 minutes 34 seconds. I think that's the one attempted tie-in to the older Yes, very long pseudo prog song. But apart from that, there's really only 2 songs I could probably live without, which would be Hearts and Our Song. Having said that, I think those 2 songs are still a lot better than some of the modern day Yes songs they're churning out. It could be argued, and I will argue this point, that I don't think Yes would be in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. It's arguable. I don't think they would be in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame or would be thought as highly as people think of them without this album. This is the album that relaunched their career into another stratosphere. They were dead in the water. The band had broken up after Drama, an album that John Anderson wasn't on. They got this band together, and this is the album that allowed them to continue to this day. They still have, within that period, they different with all the different lineups between now and 90125. There's been varying lineups, to varying degrees of quality. But I will make the argument, but they might have scratched and crawled into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame based upon everything from their first album to Drama, but I highly doubt it, to be honest with you. This is the album that allowed their legacy to continue. And I think if they had a full stop after Drama, who knows what their legacy would have been. They could have been just one of those progressive rock bands that got lost in the midst of time, that released some stellar albums, some classic albums, like Close to the Edge and Fragile. But like I said, this is the album that allowed the band to continue, and it's added to the mythology, and it's just another chapter in the Yes story, to me. And I do have a lot of time for this album. It's one of my favorite albums of all time, in the sense that it's the album, a lot of albums that are people's favorites, they're not necessarily the band's best album, but it's the album that they first discovered the band on. To me, it's my I'm going to rephrase that. This is my favorite album by Yes. Is it one of their? Is it their best album? No, probably not. Having had 35 years to work my way backwards, I've discovered Fragile and Close to the Edge and Relayer and Tornado and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, and Going for the One, another personal favorite of mine. So that was the starting point. And having said that, I think the album holds up well. And it was the toe in the water, as it were, into me working my way backwards into progressive rock and the music of the 70s, which was, by 1983, when this album was released, progressive rock was more or less dead. It was a dirty word. And then it made a nice little renaissance later on. So, that's my argument for this album. I've had a lot of years of people chirping in my ears that this is not a Yes album. It's an inferior Yes album. Well, you know what? Millions and millions of people would disagree with you, and I certainly disagree with you. It's more than a valid album, apart from Owner of a Lonely Heart. In fact, my favorite song on this album is City of Love, to be honest with you. But anyways, I will fight for this album to the death. It's, like I said, this is the album that allowed the band to move on and move forward. And who knows what would have happened without this album. In fact, I have a special place in my heart for Big Generator, but that's a whole different story. I really like Trevor Rabin. I'm a big fan of Trevor Rabin. Good for bad. I think he has a lot of things to offer, in my opinion. But you know what? That's fodder for another video. So anyways, that was my review. Sorry if I was a little bit short on talking about the album, but I think without getting, I'd never like to talk down to people like on this super audiophile. I'm just like you. I do know shit from good chocolate, as it were, and I do have ears. Everyone's ears are different, obviously, but to me, for $19.99 or less, this album is incredibly stellar. Even if it was pure black vinyl, I wouldn't think anything less of it. Very good, very quiet pressing, very, very well mastered and cut. In my opinion, like I said, it's just little differences, but the differences make a huge deal to me. And it rectifies a lot of the problems I had with the original vinyl pressing. Hence why I'm making this video. There you go. That's my talk about the album and the 35th anniversary reissue of Yes 90125. I apologize for all the sips of coffee. I know it's annoying. It's very hot. And you try doing a 20-minute long video with no break. Yeah. Anyways, I hope you liked the video. If you agree, that's wonderful. If you don't, that's fine. Let me know. Like I said, if you're thinking about this album or on the fence about it, I really wholeheartedly recommend this album. And you guys know I don't do a lot of these review videos. I do them when I feel very strongly about something. And you know what? I could show you many more variants than this, you know, of this album. Many copies of this. Like I said, I have a lot of versions of a lot of Yes albums, but this album was a benchmark in my life where it really sent me on a certain direction. And you guys know, if nothing else, I'm varied in my music that I love. And I'm a huge Yes fan, either in the 80s, 70s, 90s. Not so much now. Anyways, we're going to wrap this up. Thank you all for watching. I really appreciate it. This has been a review of the 35th anniversary of Yes 90125 on tricolored vinyl. But that's beside the point in this review. Thank you, everyone. This has been David. We'll see you next time. Take care, everyone.